Great, thanks, Andrew and Miriam. Thank you for the invitation to come and talk again to ESSA. I enjoyed last time, and I hope you guys did. I'm by no means a professional storyteller, certainly at the early stages of amateur, and I look forward to telling you the story, and I hope you enjoy a story that's got actually very little to do with exploration. But if you really use your imagination, perhaps you can draw a parallel and let's see how it goes. Okay, so a little bit of background. I'm a collector. I've been a collector my entire life of ephemera. And I had to look up how to pronounce that word earlier this morning, and I think it's correct. For those of you that don't know what ephemera means, it means a collection of things that are meant to have a very short lifespan. So other people's crap, to coin a phrase, I'm just going to call it stuff. I think the previous definition my wife would support. So there are storerooms and offices are full of collectibles. And my main interest is in postal history. Stamps, yes, but more in terms of old letters, old documents. And why? I've kind of realized over the years that I look for these things because I'm looking for the story behind it, or the story in it. So people's effects when they die, a box of their life story, a driver's license, a wedding album, a report card, etc. That's what I'm looking for. And sometimes they're little stories, and sometimes they are a little more interesting than little stories. And I think I've got something here that is warrants retelling and sharing with you guys and those who are on Zoom. And you can see by the title, it's Aunt Molly's letter. So it is a letter that I found at an auction house. I frequent a place called Old Johannesburg Warehouse. Is anyone familiar with it? You are? Excellent, Andrew. I've been going there for years. Just a tiny bit of background on that. There it is. It's in Selby Street, the south end of Joburg. Once a month, and the last week in the month, they have an auction, and it's a hell of a nice place to go. And Faunus provides a catering, and you have a cup of coffee and a croissant or two. And quite clearly, they're trying to entice you to bid and buy and part with your hard-earned money. I don't buy much. But the odd lot does come my way. It was started by and still is owned by a chap called Christian Scholz, who some of you may remember as part of the Springbok Rugby World Cup winning squad in 1995. He didn't get onto the field in the final, but he certainly played his role. Hell of a nice guy. And from a very young age, he was into antiques and things, and he's built a really, really good business. There's a slide of what it looks like on an average last weekend, and I normally sit to the right with a whole lot of buds, and we have a good time. So about a year and a half, maybe 2 years ago, I'm not entirely sure, I bought a little box of stuff, and in the bottom of this box was a letter, and there is the letter. And yeah, I mean, it's probably the envelope itself is a bit more interesting than normal. There's a beautiful Art Deco hotel in New York called the Hotel Taft. So I just park that one. You can see there's via Yankee Clipper. I wonder what that means. And it went by airmail, and it was sent to a South African address. So that's all we know for the time being. And I opened the envelope and had a look inside. And there is, I think we should minimize. How do I do that? Okay. There, hide thumbnail. Yeah, that's fine. Okay, thank you. I opened it up, and inside was, thankfully, you don't always get it, was a letter. And I read the letter. That's normal. So I think I'm just going to read the letter to you, and you can walk with me. I'll share the journey that I took, because when I finished reading the letter, so much imagery came through that I thought was worth researching and sharing on the first part. And in the second part, the letter is from an Aunt Molly. and there was a curiosity, like George, who's a monkey, I think. That's a separate story. To find out who Aunt Molly was. And there's a bit of detective work, as Andrew said, and I spent the last year and a half tracking down Aunt Molly. And I'll share that story secondly, but let's just revel, because I think it warrants reveling in the letter. To me, it's a beautiful letter, but maybe it's just me. It's dated the 12th of July, 1939. And it starts, "My dear Gladys and Jimmy, even if I have not written to you, I've often thought of you. But somehow the days seem to fly past and I don't feel like letter writing. I'm having a marvelous holiday. In England, the Brunts and the Dorfmans took me about. As well as that, I had 2 friends from Johannesburg there, so I was kept very busy. I don't like the London weather, and as I got there just after the March crisis, I found the people at their worst, depressed and worried. It was certainly not a pretty sight to see underground trenches being dug as shelter against air raids. We are too far away from the scene that I don't think we appreciate the strain that these incessant crises are having on the people. However, I managed to get about a great deal. As I mentioned on my card to you, I saw a large number of players thanks to one of my cousins who produced tickets for me every time. He is a big newspaper man and so received innumerable complimentary tickets, by which I benefited. How I came to sail on the Mauritania is sheer accident. One day I was walking down Regent Street and saw the advertisement in a shipping company's offices, and I decided there and then to sail to New York on the maiden voyage. I can assure you that if I had nothing else to remember, the thrill of that trip will last me all my life. And then New York, how different from London, and what a welcome I had from Granny's relations. 2 of them came from Boston, nearly 300 miles away, especially to meet me at the docks, and they introduced me to the rest of the family. I still have not met them all. I am a great favorite, not only as a curiosity from South Africa, but for myself alone, I hope. They have taken me 200 miles inland to spend a weekend at a farm and to Philadelphia. They think I'm most attractive, even beautiful, ahem, and that I talk like an actress. The reason for this last fact is obvious. I haven't an American accent, and to compare me to an actress is the highest compliment they can pay. But Americans are so ignorant of South Africa. I want to laugh at some of the questions I am asked. I did not know how much I knew of South Africa until I had to answer questions on population, products, native policy, immigration laws, and a few thousand other subjects. A woman today remarked with astonishment about my fair skin. She thought all South Africans were dark. Someone wanted to know if he had sewage, and another person if he had telephones, and this is America. But I like it better than London. Like us, they don't feel the strain of impending war, and so are free and ready to enjoy themselves. I've been to the World's Fair, and I'm going again because I saw only a quarter of what there is to see, although I was there for nearly 15 hours on end. This hotel is enormous, 2,000 rooms. Everyone in America talks in dollars. As soon as they point out a park or building, they tell you how much it costs. But that is better than my English cousins who do nothing but talk age, how old everything was. I'm beginning to talk dollars myself now. It sounds good. I'm being taken to the opera tomorrow night and next week to see Frederick Manx in the flesh in a play called The American Way, and also Katharine Hepburn in the Philadelphia Story. Can you picture the faces of my Form 5s when I told them I saw these people in reality, not only on the screen? I sail for England on July the 29th. So if you feel like answering this letter, write to me, care of High Commissioner for South Africa, South Africa House, London. I hope you're well and that business is good. Give Evelyn a big kiss for me. Love and best wishes from Aunt Molly. So I enjoyed that letter. I hope you guys did. And to me, there's 2 sides. The imagery that came up in 1939. Clearly the world was about to go to war. And there's a whole whack of clues in there as to who Aunt Molly could possibly be. There's cousins, there's names, there's talked Form 5s. I'll go into that a little bit more detail. That's in the second half. But let's explore a little bit. And all I did was I Googled this stuff and I tried to find images that match the commentary she made in the letter. And I think of it striking. This is the time, Art Deco times. A lot of it's in that style. Color was introduced to not photographs, but to posters and books and brochures. So if you like Art Deco, I think you'll like some of the stuff. So there's the actual letter. Look at the handwriting. Isn't it beautiful? Hotel stationery, obviously. From a collector's point of view, that's quite a big area. There are people who specialize in this. I'm not one of them, but I suppose if I added up all the bits and pieces I have, one could say it's the beginnings of a collection. And there's Aunt Molly at the end. Love and best wishes from Aunt Molly. So London, 1939. She actually arrived there, I've subsequently found out, in May. And she sailed in July, I think, to New York, or maybe a little bit earlier. No, she sailed in May to New York. So she had in London a couple of months. She went to see her plays and visited relatives, the Dorfmans and the Brunts. But what was going on in that time? They referred to the March crisis. She did. Preparing for war, underground shelters. And she saw a large number of plays. So for those of you who know your history, and even if you don't, it's only a smattering is required. Hitler was on the rampage, and policy of Lebensraum, living space, if I translated it correctly. Germany was flexing its muscles and was not happy after the First World War with the deal they got. And, they lost the war, but in the final kind of settlement, the punishment, Germany suffered, and there was resentment being built up. And over a period in time, Hitler fed off that resentment. There may very well be some parallels in this country of ours. You can draw your own conclusions. And one by one, he pushed his luck, and with Austria and Czechoslovakia. And in Czechoslovakia, in March 1939, Germany invaded the Czech Republic. This photograph here is 1938, and that's Neville Chamberlain on the left, obviously Hitler on the right. And there was an agreement, Anschluss, I think it was called. Have I got my facts mixed? Doesn't matter. Basically, it was a policy of appeasement. Basically, pacify Hitler, and whatever he's done so far, let's leave him, and hopefully he won't do it again. Well, that was a false hope. He did it again and again and again, and eventually Second World War. So she arrived in London after March 1939, and a couple of glimpses from the newspapers of the day. Hitler splits Czechoslovakia, Nazi troops marched to the border. There they are in Prague. And she encountered came into a London which knew that war was coming. 21 years after the end of World War I. So the fathers and the grandfathers knew what it was like to be at war in Europe and war in Germany. So you can imagine their fears and apprehension in the United Kingdom, Great Britain, and in London in particular. So I've found a few images. He mentioned underground shelters being built. These are actual images from June 1939. Preparation in London for an inevitable war, which was declared ultimately on the 4th of September, 1939. Not a month and a half after this letter. Air shelters, practicing emergency ambulance stuff, emergency evacuations. Can you imagine living in the apprehension and dread of what was to come? She also went to plays, didn't mention which ones, but I found a couple of plays which were 100% on at that point in time. Perhaps she saw a play called Paprika. Perhaps she saw a play called The Dancing Years. We'll never know. But there are two of about 15 to 20 plays that were on at the West End. Okay, South Africa in 1939. I'm not going to go into too much detail here, but just to draw a parallel, you heard that she had questions on population, products, native policy, immigration laws when she was in the US. I've only got one slide. Prior to the outbreak of World War II, the Nationalist Party was in power. General Herzog was the prime minister. On the outbreak of World War II, the coalition that the Nats had with the South African Party, Smuts Party, broke down. And Herzog lost his job. Smuts took over, and he was obviously the right guy to lead South Africa in the Second War. But we had had many years. Just cast your minds back to the Anglo-Boer War, English Afrikaner, the Peace Treaty of Vereeniging, the Union of South Africa being formed in 1910. Lots of damage to be done, to be fixed between English and Afrikaner, let alone people of color. That was not the issue of the day, or was it? If you go back and read the newspapers and read the party manifestos and all that kind of stuff, apartheid didn't start in 1948. The mere fact that she has been asked in 1939 about native policy and immigration laws and that kind of stuff, it was an issue then. A lot of Afrikaners, well, a significant number of Afrikaners' sympathies lay with Hitler. So also about Brandwag, for those of you that can recall in your history, it probably came close as to which way South Africa was going to go, to support Germany or to support the Allied cause. And clearly we went the Allies' way. So there she was. She'd been to a play. She had been entertained by the Brunts and the Dorfmans, and there must have been a fairly big bank account in her family, because she was strolling down Regent Street, which is never an unpleasant place to stroll, and she walked past a shipping company, which must have been the Cunard White Line Company, and she saw an advertisement for the maiden voyage of the Mauritania. And there and then, according to her words, she decided to book a trip, and off she went. So alone. And she said herself, they thought she was a very attractive woman. So a very attractive woman was alone on the maiden voyage of the Mauritania. So you can imagine that would spark anyone's curiosity. So I don't know if this was the advertisement, but it's what I could find. Cunard White Star. There's a new Mauritania. It was Mauritania 2. Mauritania 1 had been around since 1911, thereabouts, and had been scrapped in 1935. That was a magnificent ship in its own right. I have to give this talk again. I must actually put a photo of it. Yeah, a lot of the sleuth work, for want of a better word, there is so much available out here. Google Mauritania, Google London, June 1939. There's 40 images that come up. There's it's a labyrinth of tentacles of information. So here's the ship being built. And I'm meant to be keeping up full notes here, way ahead of them. Yeah, the ship was built in Liverpool at Birkenhead in yard number 1029. This too is available on the internet. It was launched on the 28th of 7, 1938, and it was launched by someone called Mary Bates, who in the tradition of ship launching was the wife of the chairman. So if you, as chairman, ever have something to launch from ESSA, you know who should do it. The maiden voyage was captained by Arthur Tillotson Brown, and of minor interest is that he was the guy who sailed the predecessor, the Mauritania 1, to the scrapyard. So out with the old and in with the new. The next few images are of the Mauritania. There it has been launched. That's what Mary Bates, this would have been in Liverpool. Quite an occasion. It was the largest ship of its time at that time, to date at that time. There it is. Isn't that magnificent? The days that I guess still exist, but if you went from London to New York back in a day, although I'm getting onto an alternative shortly, that is what you would go on. A postcard of the new Mauritania. And that picture, remarkably enough, is the Mauritania on its maiden voyage entering New York. And we know for a fact that Aunt Molly was on that ship somewhere. So there we go. Just another, I think that actually may be in New York as well on its arrival. Just a bit of addition. So July 1939, maiden voyage, or June, whenever it was, yeah, World War II broke out, and cruise ships weren't exactly in demand for cruising during World War II. So 99% of them were converted to military ships. Mauritania was no exception. And it survived the war. It became mainly a troop carrier. It traveled 930,000 kilometers during World War II, transporting troops. Think about that. And evaded the U-boats all the way through. It set a speed record. Wasn't a particularly fast boat. It's not what it was built for. Remember, there was a time when the record between London and New York and vice versa was a massive thing. And each of the shipping companies would try their best to be the blue ribbon holder. But anyway, Mauritania did set the speed record between Perth and Cape Town. Post-war, it reverted back to being a cruise liner, and it carried on doing that for about 18 years. 1965, it was taken to a town in Scotland, and it was scrapped. Ships have a finite life as well. So that's the Mauritania. New York, she arrived there. She was entertained by cousins, and she went all over the place. Maybe a little bit on where she stayed. Magnificent, I wouldn't quite say Art Deco, but it's certainly an Art Deco car. This Hotel Taft. It used to be the Hotel Manga. It was built in 1924 and then renamed in the early 1930s after President William Howard Taft, who was the President of the United States from about 1910 for one term. He was a one-term president like the predecessor of President Biden. But I'd hazard a guess, without offending anyone's politics, that on the list of how well presidents have done, President Taft will probably rank a little bit above Biden's predecessor. Yeah, so so you can guess my politics. So there's lots of ephemera stuff. Hotel stationery and hotel postcards and memorabilia are big, particularly from this kind of age. And I could have put 50 images up here. There's a few quirks here. A lot of people died. There seemed to be every now and then, and more frequent than is socially acceptable, someone would jump out of a window and land on a balcony or whatever. And there were a few famous people that did that. Feel free to research it yourself. And while she was there, she saw, as mentioned in the letter, two plays. One, The American Way, with the Frederick Manx, I think his name is, Mark. And then the more well-known, certainly after 70-odd years more, Katharine Hepburn, The Philadelphia Story. And these are the actual posters. Again, just a search on the internet throws these things up. So it wasn't difficult. And then she went to the World's Fair. And she spent 15 hours there, and she only saw a quarter of it. So think of a Mursa big Rand show. You guys will remember the Rand show. This is what it was in New York, just on a global scale. So it was the second biggest World Trade Fair ever. 44 million people came to see this show. Think about it. The entire population of the United States, it's about 350 or 380 million now. Back in those days, it was probably about 100 million, I guess, or maybe slightly out. The show that was the biggest was the one in St. Louisiana, 1904. They had something similar, and that exceeded it in terms of number of attendees. So the next 8 or so slides, and I couldn't.
Sorry, Mike, your sound has just disappeared. I don't know if you muted yourself by accident or something happened.
I
Okay.
don't see an obvious
Okay,
reason for that.
you're back. You're back. You can carry on talking. You
Can
sound
you hear me?
Yes, no, it just disappeared for a little while. You're back.
Oh, okay. All right. Yeah. Thank you. Yeah. Well done. Thank you, Andrew. Okay. So we have no idea what happened there, but that's okay because apparently you can still hear me. So the next 8 or so slides are stuff from the World Fair in 1939, a ticket book. This was these are the iconic symbols from that trade fair. Like remember the Tower of Light at the Rand Show? I guess that whatever it is and all were similar. Scrapbook, a postcard, a photograph from the air. You can see the symbols down there. A teapot, all Art Deco, a ring, a tray. World's Fair collectibles. So there are whole magazines on collecting posters and stuff from, and I can see why. They're absolutely beautiful images. A box of matches. The pavilion, again, remember the Rand Show? You'd have the mining pavilion and you'd have other pavilions. And this was the electrical products building. And Google tells me that the very first Remington dry shave razor was exhibited, demonstrated in that building at the World Fair. So yeah, that was invented and first produced in 1937. The theme tower of the trade fair. So yeah, I hope you enjoyed that. Aunt Molly at some stage must have got back to the UK. I have no idea. She did, because I subsequently found out. The letter doesn't indicate it. She just says, come and see me at the embassy, or send post to the embassy. But she sent the letter. And the letter went via, you remember the envelope, via the Yankee Clipper. Okay, so what is the Yankee Clipper? You'll see it's airmail. So the Yankee Clipper is a flying boat. And it's a Boeing 314, which were built between 1938 and 1941. There were only 12 that were ever built, 9 of them Pan Am airplanes and 3 elsewhere. The Yankee Clipper, which is this actual plane, yep, Yankee Clipper, was launched by Eleanor Roosevelt, the wife of the president at the time, on the 3rd of March 1939. So this must have been one of the very first, not the first, but one of the first flights of this plane. In fact, the first flight was on the 24th of June 1939. And remember, she wrote this letter in 12th of July, whenever it was. So maybe it was shortly afterwards. And again, it was the height of luxury. A return flight from New York to London and back cost $675. That's $12,000 in today's terms. If you flew from San Francisco to Japan, one way was $16,000. That's a lot of money in today's terms. So it was the height of luxury, and you got value for money from what I've read. I'm just going to share a few images. So there's the cockpit and air crew. Very nice lounge. I don't think planes look like that these days. And clearly, yeah, $12,000 for that little kid must have been a family of some means. There's a cutout. So I don't think they were able to take too many passengers. You can see for yourselves, seating at the back, down below, some bunk beds, more seating, the dining room, and up above some cargo holds. So I imagine Aunt Molly's letter was sitting somewhere in the cabin up there. Flying over the Atlantic. Again, a huge interest in the postal mail that came from these clippers. And yeah, some wonderful collections. This is one that I own. I have a few, not a lot. Okay, so that's just sharing some of the imagery that came about from the letter. well, what about Aunt Molly? Who was Aunt Molly? And I was curious. Let's see if I can find it. So I started, and I again turned to Google, and I used all the clues that I thought I had discovered. You remember the Brunts and the Dolphins? She mentioned cousins, granny's relations, Form 5, so she must have been a teacher. Give Evelyn a big kiss for me. And she wrote to Gladys and Jimmy Powell. So that's where I started. And this is my effort. Before a remarkable coincidence occurred, which really unlocked everything, I managed to produce all of this from what I could find on the internet. Genealogy data is unbelievable. I found Gladys Power. You'll see there on born 1915, Gladys Cecile Power. She married Israel Jimmy Powell. So I had the exact people. And you can follow on these genealogy websites who their brothers are, who their sisters are, who their parents, grandparents, where they came from, where they're buried. Not perfectly, but you can get a damn good. In fact, that's what I got from that. And I managed to contact Anthea Kirkman in the Lions. And you'll see there are 3 surnames at least that come up, which gave me big hints. Lyons on the left-hand side. You'll see Eliza, that's how you pronounce it, David Lyons. To Hirsch, so the 2 key characters are Hirsch Lyons and Sophie, maiden name Dorfman Lyons. So the Dorfman's on the top, the Lyons down there, then we're following the Powells down on the right-hand side. I contacted Anthea through Facebook. She must have been a little surprised to have got a message from me on Facebook Messenger, but I was polite enough, and she responded. Indeed, she is the granddaughter of Gladys Powell. Didn't really know what I was talking about, didn't have a clue who Aunt Molly was, but was happy to help. You must speak to my uncle, she said. So Roy Lyons, also in Australia. I didn't at that stage get hold of him. And there's a little bit of a hiatus. 3 or 4 months went by. And then earlier this year, remarkably, I'm a member of a Facebook group called the Edenvale Philatelic Society. And I'd started chatting to a young lady by the name of Patricia Mill for philatelic reasons. And and I have the full conversation, so if you never want me to take you through it, Carla, anyway, so we got talking, and it emerged after a while that she was Jewish. Oh, in fact, so that's one of the facts. So what was very clear through genealogy that those entire families were all Jewish. So I knew, okay, this is where we're going. I saw she lived in Norwood or Orchards or somewhere on that side of the M1. And she knew I was interested in postal history. And I said, by the way, have you ever come across the Lyons and the Dorfman and Powell families? So there was a silence, like a deathly silence for a couple of days. And then it's a bit odd. We've been talking all day, every day for a while. And like, have I offended you in some way? And then a message comes to, why do you want to know? So I said, okay. No, well, yes, I'd explained myself. Here's the letter, and this is what I'm trying to do. And anyway, it emerges that those families were her husbands. So she set me, and she had inherited from her grandmother through one of the sons of Sophie and Hirsch Lyons, Vivian. She had inherited all the family records. So photograph after photograph after photograph and document, giving me exactly what I needed. So she then sent me, that's her, with her husband, Ivan, and their 2 children. And this is what she sent me. So here are the 2 families. Eliza, David Lyons, you can see still she didn't do this. This is what had been sitting in her records. There's the Lyons side, there the Dorfmans, Hirsch and Sophie got married, and if you follow down Hirsch and Sophie, I'm not going to go into huge detail on this. There were 5 children, and there are descendants from those children, descendants of descendants, and there's enough ammunition for load shedding. Okay, I'm working up to a crescendo. Yeah, so yeah. Okay, I'm almost at the end. So just a little bit of a it's like one of these mind map things where you have little dots and you press it, and it explodes, and you press and you press and you press, and very soon when you do this kind of thing, you are suddenly touching on so many people, so many countries, religions, etc., that you can follow this road forever. I'm not finished yet, but it's at a point where I think it's worthy of, well, I'm interested in sharing it with an audience, and very interested in the feedback that I get, which will help me guide me on what I should do with it, if anything. So I've mentioned the 3 families. So the 2 families up there, you'll see Grodno on the top left-hand corner, which is where the Lyons family came from, and Riga, where the Dorfman family came from. And Grodno is a tiny little village. That's it in Poland. Okay, so I'm not 100% certain when that guy came out, but I think it would have been round about the turn of the century, before the First World War. And that is Riga in Latvia, or Lithuania, Latvia, capital, and that is where the Dorfman side of the family came from. Why did they come? For those of you that know your Jewish history, Jewish people didn't only have a tough time in Germany in the 1930s, and certainly during the World War II. They've had a tough time for a very long time. And the pogroms, if I'm pronouncing it correctly, in that part of the world, in Poland and the Baltic states and in the Soviet Union, life wasn't easy, and plenty left. At that time, immigration was possible. So that's why you had so many Jewish people in South Africa coming from Lithuania, from Latvia. I've got a lot of work still to do on that, but those are the broad brushstrokes. I also remembered that in the back of my mind, when I saw the word Lions, I thought, but hang on, I've seen other documentation from Lions in a box. And I'd long since taken the contents of that box that I bought originally, which a letter was, and put them in different things. But I finally found a postcard album from Deutsche Südwestafrika. That original guy, Elisa Lyons, was actually a rabbi. And he had served as a rabbi with the South African Army in Deutsche Südwestafrika in the First World War. Got beautiful photographs of him in his uniform, and again, another sideshow. But in this postcard album, postcards were a really big thing in the early 20th century. There were collectors all over the world. So the emails of the day. There were about 60 to 80 postcards, quite a few that were from Aunt Molly. I'm not going to go into huge detail, but what was in those postcards helped me considerably in unraveling the mystery and putting 2 and 2 together and finding out who is who. And there's still a lot of work to be done on that. A few little snapshots on the legacy of the Lyons family. They did very, very well. To this day, there is something called the Hirsch Lyons School or schools, which is a Jewish medium, and I think runs through pre-primary, primary, and high school. So if you want to follow religious kind of tuition, that is where a Jewish family would send their kids. But the most well-known of the Lyons family is this chap, the son of Hirsch and Sophie, Vivian Lyons. He was a very much larger than life character, and very into his vintage bikes and cars and everything. I think this is where the business side things came along. They were into digging for diamonds. These are works on the Vaal River. Their businesses that they had, and there's lots of photographs of that. You can see some of their equipment. They built Waterkloof Air Station, which exists to this day. And then to wrap it up, and I'm hoping in future presentations there's more meat in this section, because notwithstanding all of this information, Aunt Molly actually isn't really well known in the family. The only things that I have been able to find out, I have one photograph, which will come after this. And there's an individual in there that people think is Aunt Molly. I'm sure once I've talked to all of the families, I'll get more information and hopefully more photographs. But she was born in 1901. She died in 1949, 47 or 48 years old. She's buried in West Park Cemetery in Johannesburg. I've actually seen a photograph of her grave, and I will visit it at some stage. She was a teacher. So when she mentioned her Form 5s, she was referring to her Form 5s at Jeppe Girls High. That's where she taught. And second from the right is who we think Aunt Molly is. So that's it. There we go.
Excellent.
Stop sharing.
Excellent. That was really good.
Wow, wasn't that a fantastic talk, hey? I think Mike's the kind of guy, if he just went down to the shops, he could find a story and a history that would just amaze us all. And I think he just picks up these threads and just pulls himself along it and it takes us into these most amazing places. So Mike, a warm round of applause to you. That was such a fantastic talk. Are there any questions from our live audience first? We'll just take one or two questions before load shedding. Miriam's got a question here. She must have.
Yeah.
She died, yeah. But you know, she didn't, from what I can gather, she didn't marry. There were no children. And the memory of the current generation, certainly Patricia and her husband Ivan, and the cousin in Australia, they know she exists. That's it. There are a couple of older members of the family who are still alive, who I haven't been able to speak to because of COVID. But hopefully I'll get that chance and we'll find out more about Molly himself.
Okay. One more question there from Jono.
Were they related to the most famous lions from the lion in the UK?
Okay, so Jono's question is, are they related to the famous Lions family who started the chain of tea shops?
I don't know. Could well be, because their family, both Lions and Dorfman, are spread right around the world. And what I've been told, they've done in their own right very well. You saw the mention there about big newspaper and that kind of thing. One thought that did occur to me, I suppose it's only those of us of a certain generation. Have any of you ever bought from Lions Outfitters, a gentleman's clothing store near Wits Business School, the old Mike's Kitchen? No, clearly not. But if you want good old-fashioned clothing, that's where you go. I've been going there for many years. And the guy who owns it is a Mr. Lions. So I was there. In fact, my wife took me out and made me buy a jacket. The jacket's sitting over there, and I looked pretty good when I came in. But, and when I go out, but that's it. I asked Mr. Lyons, because by God is here, Mr. Lyons, he's 80s now, if he was related. He knew the Lyons family, he knew Vivian Lyons, but it's not the same.
Are there any questions from our Zoom audience? Lewis, can you read them to us?
There were no top questions.
Okay. All right. I think then, can I just ask everyone to turn their cameras on again, please, and unmute themselves? That's the live audience as well.
Oh, Lindy said there was a teacher at St. Mary's, DSG Pretoria, by the surname of Powell G.
Sorry, we couldn't hear that. Lewis, can you repeat that?
Okay. Lindy sent a message now saying there was a teacher at St. Mary's, Victoria, by the surname of Powell, in parentheses G. I don't know
Okay.
if that makes any sense.
Okay, thank
might
you
be a
very
lead
much.
to follow.
I'll follow that up as I do.
Okay. All right, everyone, put your cameras on, please. Unmute yourself. Let me hand over a real bottle of wine to our speaker.
Thank you very much.
Fantastic. Really a special talk. It's amazing what exploration is. It doesn't always have to be swinging off a rope. It's mountain. So, Mike, thank you once again. And we certainly look forward to hearing you again. Okay, everyone. Thanks.
Thank you very much.
And we will see you next month.
Cool stuff. Thank you. Cool.